Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Beyond the Brief podcast. We have a bit of a different setup here today. As you can see, we're on the sofa, and I'm joined today by Sarah again, who you saw on a previous episode. And today we're delighted to be joined by Karen Jamieson as well, who's our digital design director at New Creative. So welcome, Karen, and thank you for being convinced to come on the show for the first time.
I might regret this later.
We're going to have a completely different setup today, really casual conversation on the couch, and we're going to chat about AI, hugely topical at the moment and has been for some time. But as a creative agency, we're seeing AI coming into our lives rapidly from all different directions, and we thought it'd be really interesting to chat to Sarah and Karen today just about our experience of AI, how it's impacting our team, our work, the work we do with clients, just come at it from all angles, really. And so I'm going to dive straight in. I think the topic of the conversation today is whether AI, is it a creative disruptor or a destroyer? So for us and our teams at the agency, obviously AI is emerging into our lives quite rapidly now. So how do you see that impact? So managing creatives and designers, what's AI doing to them? Is this something that's enabling creativity? Is it stifling it? What's your thoughts? Who wants to start?
Well,
Go on, Sarah.
I'm just going to say that there's a couple of different angles, isn't there? Because we've got the design, the tactical design piece, and then there's like the strategic piece, and how AI affects both of those. So I'm going to let Karen talk about the sort of the design piece. Well, I'll interject as well, obviously. But yeah, Karen, you can answer that particular one. Or your opinions, I suppose, isn't it?
There's definitely pros and cons to it. So yeah, from a sort of practical standpoint, it seems to be that AI is injected in every single software. Every man and their dog has put AI into everything. Sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes it just seems a bit added on. They haven't actually fixed like fundamental problems within softwares before they've started adding in AI. I mean, I know a lot of designers personally that, we've had the same charts and diagrams tool in Illustrator since day dot, and it's never gotten any better. But now they've put in AI to help you draw, like turning pictures into icons and illustrations, but really badly. I think Illustrator's like amalgamation of AI hasn't been very good.
Yeah.
I think Photoshop, it's probably a bit more successful because it has streamlined a lot of like the menial tasks, like just adding a bit more background to things, just stuff that takes time to do well. It is saving a bit of time, but then it just allows the designer just to add the finishing flourishes and touches.
Yeah.
Did we not once ask, was it Photoshop or Illustrator to make us a picture, and it came up with a person with 6 fingers or something?
That's Adobe Firefly, isn't it? So that's their version of, Mid-Journey, basically. So it's a text-to-image generator.
Yeah.
They sort of position themselves to be a bit more of like an ethical text-to-image generator, because they're not just scraping like people's personal profiles on Instagram and stuff like that. I think they use stuff that's already on their Adobe, like the stock website. This is more
like the generative AI kind of stuff.
Yeah. So they're not just scalping everywhere from the internet. I think Adobe Firefly, they just scalp from their own pool, but it's just bloody awful.
It was awful. I remember that thinking,
tears in my eyes.
We've got no worries there.
So do you think then all of these tools, as you say now, it's been thrown into everything. So from a creative perspective, where we're talking about visual creation using AI, are we fundamentally saying that really that is still for the non-designer? That's for the person that couldn't otherwise use a professional tool like Photoshop or Illustrator, and the space where it maybe is going to be used at the moment is for a non-design professional to attempt to create an image on the fly? Or is there fundamental use for scamping ideas or anything like that from a professional team perspective? Do you see it emerging in that space at all?
Yeah, possibly. And like I said, I think it's good for streamlining some monotonous tasks, but I'll give you an example of where it could be useful. When I used to work in PR, quite often, the creative directors get asked to pitch 6, 7, 8 ideas to a client, like Sky, for example. And not all of them are going to be successful. And when we designers had to take the ideas from the creative directors, we had to badly mock up something in Photoshop And actually using something like Midjourney would just help them to come up with an idea really quickly, because these clients aren't going to pay for all these ideas. They just need a concept. They just need a visual to buy into the idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. And then once they pick the idea, then you flesh it out and do a proper job of it. So definitely it could be used as a tool just to streamline conceptual processes. We don't use that personally yet because I haven't really seen a use case for it, but it could be useful in the future.
Yeah.
And I suppose the one thing that I'm seeing on LinkedIn a lot is people saying, oh, if you're going to start up a business, then you can use, this AI software for a logo and this AI software.
Like, here's a suite of tools that you need to start a company.
Which, I suppose, is it a good thing? I mean, it devalues what we do, I suppose, as a branding agency.
I think there's that difference between, launching something maybe quickly because you're under time pressure and cost pressure to do something to get to market quickly. But I think ultimately in the long run, you would always have to go back and revisit it once you got to a certain size or you were trying to target certain clients. As with any new business, you'd have to at some point go back and make sure that you're reflecting yourself in the right way and have done things.
And I think this is where people need to understand that that's the case. Like, you can't build a brand on the fly like that really quickly and expect it to stick for the long term.
And certainly nothing with any meaning.
You might, for example, if you're a startup and you need to go and get funding, you need to go and get investment, and you need some sort of brand to go to those investment companies with, then you could knock something up really quickly just to get through the door. But I think once you have that funding, then you have to go back and you have to do it properly, because if you're doing that, then actually there are no roots and there's no foundation there. And we talked about this a few podcasts ago about the importance of brand. So if you don't then follow those steps, you can't expect to build a strong brand based on an AI-driven logo, which, I've seen them and there's nothing distinct about them. There's nothing that makes me think, oh, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, of course, because it's not original.
They're just scraping the internet for stuff that already exists and just combining it. If you want an airline logo, for example, it'll look at all airline logos and you're going to get a logo that looks exactly like every airline.
Exactly.
So that comes directly then back into the space that Karen was just talking about, which is that fundamentally it's a tool.
Yeah.
It could be great for proof of concept kind of work, ideation, creating a mood board, something at very early foundation stages of a creative process. But
you still need the creative to be put into that, though. Of course, it's not going to come up with stuff all by itself.
Yeah, and I think that's another really good point, actually. And I think we've been using ChatGPT quite a bit just to kind of explore where the benefits can sit within utilising it as a tool. And I think one thing I've personally found is that it's only as good as the information you put in.
Yeah.
You cannot spend 10 seconds writing a question and expect to get really good quality, detailed.
It has to be really tailored.
But the more you put in, the more you get out.
Yeah.
And
I did a test the other day, actually. It was from one of the shoots that we did. And I put in a photo. And so I don't know if ChatGPT would be able to do anything with it. And it had a white background. And I said, take this photo, isolate the foreground, and then change the background colour. And it came back and it was the same picture, and it just put a coloured border around the edge of the picture. So it was, completely useless.
Yeah.
But it was a really good test because, unless you can actually pinpoint exactly what you want it to do, and I'm not sure that ChatGPT would have been able to do it anyway, but the point is, if you don't focus and pinpoint exactly what you want it to do, it is not going to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's machine learning, it's literal thinking, it's not lateral thinking. So a designer can't put in, like you say, 20-second question or request and expect something good to come out of it. Yeah,
I've seen some really great guides actually that people share on platforms like TikTok about, what information to give to things like GPT, in order to get good responses. So I think we're starting to see now almost quite detailed, almost guidelines put together about how to maximize its usefulness. That actually is quite helpful. And I think more and more of that will emerge in order to help us kind of utilize it and get the best out of it. But of course, it's always going to be, within its own limitations.
Yeah. And guidelines are great, but I think there is still an element of like, if you're deciding to use some form of AI, then you need to be testing yourself to work out what is going to work for you, because everyone's different. And this is where, humans are always going to be better than machine learning for the creative industry, because we are all different and we have different viewpoints and different ways of developing creativity. It might be that the way that I use it would be different to the way that you use it.
And I think that's a positive, because then I suppose we would ultimately get different outcomes.
Different results, yeah.
So I think maybe that's the negative side of us finding this kind of library of what we should ask it, because then if we all start asking the same things, we're all going to start getting the same answers as well.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, if we think about the life cycle of a project, obviously we're talking about the creative bit here, but that's often not obviously the bit that comes first. So let's go back a step, and this is a question for you, Sarah. We think about strategy, which is, front-loaded at the beginning of a project. How can AI help you with a strategic process, or can it not?
It can, to a certain extent. So building a strategy is always going to be something that a human needs to do, because you need that point of distinctiveness. You need that lateral thinking in order to build a strong brand strategy. But it can help with process, and it can help with, say, coming up with different avenues of exploration that then you would go away and explore yourself. So I have been testing it, as I said, finding out what works and what doesn't. So what I did is, for some competitor analysis, you've got your 5 different competitors, for example, and you want to go and you want to know what each of the competitors' vision, mission, values are, what's their point of difference, what's their tone of voice, that kind of thing. You're answering all these questions when you're analysing each competitor. And so I said, I'm going to take the websites of each of these competitors and I'm going to load them into ChatGPT, and I'm going to ask it to find me their vision statement. Right? Very simple request. And it couldn't do it. And the reason is that it can't actually go onto the websites and scrape the sites for some particular reason. I can't remember what it is. You'll probably know what it is.
I will. I won't get too technical, but you can effectively block.
It wasn't allowed.
Traffic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't allowed to scrape the information from the website. So that meant that despite the fact that it being quite a simple request, it wouldn't be able to do it. So that would end up being a manual task. But what you can do is you can go and get all the information that you need, and answer those questions, and you can load all of that information into ChatGPT, and it can help you analyze it. So, for example, it can compare, if you've got 5 different vision statements, it can compare those, and it can tell you what they're saying the same, what they're saying differently very quickly, probably quicker than we would. So it can do that kind of analysis for you, but it can't go and do the work for you.
Yeah. So again, it's back to process again.
Back to process. Yeah. It's back to maybe making things a little bit quicker, where there's some very menial, labour-intensive or time-consuming tasks.
Yeah.
It can help. But it's never going to be able to take the whole thing and build your strategy. It's just not.
That's the beauty of like computers in general, is the fact that it can process lots of complex information really quickly. So I was going to say that I've used that to help me sort of summarize very complicated briefs, because we work with clients that work in very complex industries. I mean, that's the beauty of doing what we do. We work with lots of different clients in lots of different industries, and it's very interesting, but we're not experts at things which are medical or financial. And sometimes the clients that we deal with don't speak our language and we don't speak theirs. So sometimes what you've got to do is you've got to just take their brief and I put it into ChatGPT, and I've asked them to summarize the main points are. And you do have to check it by eye and just read through it, but it does help pick out some main bits. And I thought, this is actually where it's useful. It just helps me digest really complicated information because it's a computer. That's what it does.
Yeah. And like you said, it's then speeding up that task.
Totally.
Those kind of quite laborious tasks that might take some time. And then the benefit for the client, I guess, is that we're able to work faster.
Yeah.
as well, which then means we can get through projects quicker and pass on those savings to clients too. So there's an end benefit to the client too if we're able to kind of rapidly get through those quite labour intensive things where, you know, if we don't need to pass on those kind of costs unnecessarily, then it's obviously better not to do so. So again, really highlighting the importance of how it can be used in process, in projects. I want to come full circle back to the creative piece again. And we talked about the early creative process with, you know, scamping and ideas and ideation, that kind of thing. But we all know, or I'm going to mention one recently, some big brands have started to work with AI and push that out into, you know, big real world projects now. So the one I was going to mention was for Coca-Cola with their Christmas ads, which has been, you know, spoken about a lot since that was launched. So people clearly are trying to really push the envelope on how AI can be used creatively. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, aside from the actual creative output, you know, do you have an opinion, you know, just in terms of the usage of AI to that degree creatively?
I think from that particular ad that you've pointed out, I think it's incredibly lazy on Coca-Cola's part. They're a huge multinational company. Their marketing budget, especially for Christmas, must be enormous.
Yeah.
So why do that? But what I found was interesting. I mean, you found an article on LinkedIn where people responded quite positively to it. But then equally, I read another article not that long ago saying about 40% of people can't recognise AI from regular, like, generated imagery or shot photography.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite astounding.
Yeah.
And because they'd used quite a recognisable ad and then they'd added bits of AI into it, people probably didn't immediately notice because people had the feelings of nostalgia when they saw the advert. Oh, it's the advert with the trucks.
Yeah.
It's already got quite a strong brand recognition, that advert. Everyone knows it. It's been around for donkeys.
Yeah. And it's getting copied by other brands now.
So I don't think people noticed it. But if someone had made a brand new advert from start to end using AI, people might start to notice a little bit, because I think AI, again, hasn't quite got to the level it needs to. So there's an element of uncanny valley when you see people in adverts or people in AI where they've got that strange, like, they don't look like real people. It's quite unsettling. And I think people would notice that. I think it's probably fine if you use it in, like, for other things. I think you might get away with it for, like, products or background peripherals, but people and anything where you need some sort of human emotion.
It's the human bit, which I think is, for me, the most concerning. And I think one thing I'm really interested to see how it plays out over time is, like, the kind of, like, the brand impact. Like, I feel like the use of AI is potentially not authentic. And therefore, you know, we all talk about authenticity and the importance of that within, you know, creating a strong brand. So, you know, if there then becomes negativity within public perception around the use of AI in such big creative projects like that, you know, is there potential for, you know, negative impact on brand reputation and things like that? So that's where I'm really interested to see how it plays out.
It'd be really interesting to see. But I think with the Coca-Cola advert, actually, I don't think it's done any harm to their brand because the messaging is still consistent. So, yes, the advert was using AI. Was it using all AI? I'm not sure.
No, I think it was interspersed with bits of AI. Yeah.
So I think therein lies something in that maybe AI is fine as long as you're not using it entirely for a whole advert, and it's elements of AI. So, for example, in the Coca-Cola advert, they've got animals, haven't they? They've got a polar bear and
a very freaky polar bear.
Yeah.
And then there was, I think, the bottle top opening, which looked clearly like AI.
Yeah.
I think that was the bit where I thought, yeah, that looks so fake.
Yeah, so I can understand why they might want to use it for the polar bear, for example, because you're not going to get a polar bear doing what they want it to do.
No.
But if there's a human element, like you say, then that should be real because otherwise, you know, it doesn't feel authentic.
Yeah. And that for me is the big question, I think, is really about, you know, what is it doing around, you know, trust, brand reputation, that authenticity piece where so many businesses are trying to become more human in one way or another. If you've got brands now really leaning into AI, where does that, where does that make them sit? And
it'd be really interesting I haven't seen Coca-Cola's response to, the noise around the advert, but it'd be really interesting to see what they say.
Is there a danger?
Or what they might
I suppose it's about openness then at the end of the day as well, because, I feel like there's a danger that does it become like, oh, it's okay to use AI as long as nobody notices? But then, then how honest is a brand going to be, as to whether they are or aren't using it? It's like, oh, no, we don't use AI, no. But
if you're saying, if you're using AI and you're saying you're not using AI, then that's a lie, and that's not authentic.
But if no one can notice, then, I'm not saying at the moment we're at that point, because I think, as Karen's clearly pointed out, it maybe to a trained eye in particular, it can be very, very noticeable. But if AI gets to a point where nobody notices, then then where does that conversation sit?
Yeah. But what I want to know and ask actually and get opinions on is, obviously CGI has been around for years and we've used CGI a lot.
Yeah.
And now we're using AI. But what's the real difference between CGI and AI?
Yeah.
And what you're portraying?
CGI is still created by a human. They're using digital technology to create a scene, but all of that work is done.
It is, but it's not
by
real.
People. It's not real, but it is all created by people.
Yeah.
But you could argue that the AI was created by a person because that person's got to focus.
Put in the right information.
Put in the right information,
course,
and so there's still that creativity behind it.
Again, maybe it simply comes back to transparency. And if you're going to be remaining authentic and honest and keep the trust, then you do what Coca-Cola have done. And you're completely upfront about what you've done. You tell the story as to why, and you ensure that you've still got
It's actually quite an unusual move for them, just because a lot of their marketing and a lot of who they are is around people. Everything's about share a Coke.
Yeah.
I remember they had the bottles where you could put people's names on it. So because, AI is such an unhuman thing almost, it seems like an unusual step for them to take. I suppose it just seemed like they were playing with the idea almost. They took their nice old-fashioned, the old school nostalgic ad that everyone remembers and sprinkled it with a few, bits of, things that sort of, expanded the realism of it, by adding a polar bear, for example, like you wouldn't shoot a real one. So it was interesting that how they used and how they sprinkled it. I would be interested to know, if they then use that idea going forward, like every Christmas, are we going to get the same advert, but with a new AI put in it, And
I suppose the reality is that we're going to see more and more brands experimenting with AI and then probably looking at reactions from customers, from audiences, to see how well it's received.
Yeah, and you mustn't forget though that when they're developing these adverts, there's always testing before it goes out into the big wide world.
Like with any creative, things have to be tested, so it just becomes part of that creative process. Okay, so talking on that human piece, obviously a big part of any creative is not just visuals but also words. So clearly everybody has been exploring all of these different AI platforms to help them with their writing now. So, again, similar conversation, but I'm just interested to know your thoughts on whether, can brands stay authentic and sound human if they're using AI to help with copy?
Well, I think if people are being lazy and asking ChatGPT or another AI tool to write copy for them, then you're not going to get that human storytelling piece, because by the very definition, it needs to be human. If they're asking it to give some inspiration as to what they can talk about, and then they go off and write it, or if they write a piece and they ask it to correct the grammar, then obviously you've still got that human element to it. So it depends how far you think it should go. I feel
like this is a space that's really evolving quite quickly. I think the visual side of AI is moving at a slightly slower pace, but I feel personally like the language piece is really moving ahead at speed. So there's a lot of different platforms now that you can, like upload a tone of voice to, and they're meant to learn, those guides and that that tone of voice and be able to then write language back to you in a similar style. I think obviously the jury's out as to just how well that is still done, but you can see the direction of travel, can't you, in terms of where we're all going.
I can see when lazy people use it.
Oh, of course
It's
you can.
so
It's so obvious.
obvious.
Yeah.
For example, I received a new business email today, and they had clearly used AI to write the new business email.
I think it's a sector that's
They
super
had
guilty.
obviously been on our website, seen that I'd written a blog about
I don't think they probably would have even been on your website. I think AI went to your
website.
there's a blog
Yeah.
on there about purpose. And they had shoehorned the fact that I had this blog on the website, and then said, "Oh, we've seen this. We loved your article about the purpose-led brands." And that got me to thinking. This is a very common thing that you see. That got me to thinking. How's your accounting? How's your accounting? And I was like, what has that got to do with a blog about
Purpose-led brands?
Is that kind of like classic, like I'm going to get some AI generated insights into a business and then turn that into
a
my
sales tool,
outreach email?
And it was terrible.
You see those templated emails coming across all the time. I think it's a sector more than any other which is super guilty of poorly using AI.
And the problem is that you can clearly see it's AI. You're annoyed that someone has approached you in the first place and not being savvy enough to go and actually research your company properly and research you. And that immediately makes me say, no thanks. And I won't even entertain what they're saying on the email.
Well, it's helped automate your email deletion system, basically.
It does help that.
Yeah. I think what's obvious today is we could talk a lot about AI because we could probably carry
This
on
is
for
part
another,
one. We need to
another
do part
20,
two.
25 minutes. But we will have to wrap up today. Have you got any final thoughts about AI in, your work or your space, or, how you're seeing it, being adopted within our sector?
I'm not overly worried it's going to take over our jobs.
Well, that's a good thing.
That's definitely a good thing for us.
I read a horrendous statistic somewhere which said something like AI is going to take away something like 800 million jobs over the next 5 years. But interestingly, that it was going to create almost 1 billion.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's going to take away more than it generates. So clearly, I think AI is something that we all need to get used to working with effectively. We need to learn, how it can be utilized well, what pitfalls to avoid, how to integrate it into our lives and our processes, and then find out what opportunities there are to, help us all do our jobs even better.
And, I don't think AI can exist and be successful unless there are humans that know how to use it and know how to use it properly. So we're not going to turn into, like Terminator, where AI machines take over the world because they can't think for themselves, and they don't have that ability. So I think.
Yeah, I'm the same. And like, time will tell, and like AI changes every 5 minutes. It's a constantly evolving thing. And I mean, famous last words, I don't see it necessarily taking away jobs, but I see it changing jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think that's a really
it would be nice for it to take away those menial tasks.
Yeah, well, hopefully,
and allow
it can
us
help
to do
focus on the more
stuff that
creative
we're good at.
aspects of our job. So I think really the key takeaway here is ultimately that it's another tool.
It's a tool,
and it's a tool that can be used, to be quite effective. I don't think at the moment it's, as you said, anything to worry about in terms of it taking away, our jobs or our roles completely, but it will definitely change the way we're working, and hopefully for the better.
Yeah.
Yep.
Brilliant. I think we're going to end on that note and probably come back for part 2 and part 3 as we learn more about AI.
Surprisingly optimistic, wasn't it?
Too optimistic. No Terminator tragedies on the horizon.
No Skynet.
No Skynet. Thanks so much for joining us today. I will drag you back for another episode in the future. And I'm loving our new sofa setup, which feels super chill, which is really nice. Thanks to all of you for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you can catch future episodes. And we'll see you either here or on our usual setup again very soon. Thank you very much.